Andrea Russo will introduce to you how to solve a problem which he had a tear in the LASIK flap, in a hyperopic LASIK. You will learn how to calculate the depth of the new interface that got to create with the femtosecond laser, and how to deal with this complication ended in a happy end in this very case. I'm sure that all of you refractors will learn about how to deal with these cases in a very particularly successful way. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jorge Alio, for inviting me in this session, where I will present this case about LASIK enhancements following a previous LASIK for hyperopia with a flap tear during the first LASIK. She was a friend of mine. Actually, she still is a good friend of mine. And the preoperative refraction at the age of 43 was plus 2.5 in the right eye and plus 2.25 in the left eye. All the other findings were unremarkable, so we went ahead with LASIK, with presbyon LASIK, in order to introduce a small amount of spherical aberration just to increase the depth of field. So this is the video of the LASIK, but as you can see, we noticed that tear in the flap. So the stroma was perfect, but there was a hole, a tear right in the center of the flap. You can see here very well where the cannula is also penetrating inside the tear. So here probably the management was not really perfect because the operating field became like a swimming pool, but anyhow we could put all the pieces together, and now the small tear is somehow solved, and we applied a bandage contact lens in order to keep all the pieces together and allow some healing of the cornea. So here at the end of the procedure, a contact lens was applied, and actually the patient did very well. This is the topography after the treatment few months later, and everything is perfect. So the treatment was perfectly centered on the visual axis. Maybe there is some remodeling of the epithelium. You can see it here in the bottom left image. This is likely due to the healing processes of this tear. So this is the only strange appearance, but all the rest was unremarkable. After a couple of years, I saw this patient again, and there was some extra hyperopia that was developing. It was +1 in the right eye, +2 with some astigmatism in the left eye. The left eye was the eye with the flap tear previously. So the question was how to go ahead with the touch-up for this patient. These were the possible options for the management. Of course, PRK, but actually it was quite dangerous to do PRK with manual debridement of the epithelium because there was the serious risk of reopening the flap tear that was perfectly closed and sealed. Otherwise, another option was touchless PRK in order to remove the epithelium with the laser, but still not a good option because the amount of the epithelium was now uneven, and so a laser removal would be very few predictable. The ICL was another option, but the anterior chamber depth was too shallow. We were well below 2.8 millimeters. So the remaining option was a new LASIK. And of course, reopening the previous flap was not a good idea because of the tear. So our decision was to create a new, deeper and larger flap underneath the previous one in order to create a new plane for the enhancements. So, of course, we try to measure everything. We measure with the ultrasound technology and also with OCT technology, which is very convenient and reliable. And especially we went, as you can see here, in the periphery of the flap because The vast majority of the epithelial remodeling after a hyperopic case is happening in the periphery of the flap because the hyperopic treatment is peripheral. So the initial flap thickness was 100 micron, but here the flap was 148 microns because of the remodeling of the epithelium on top of it. A very convenient measurement and scan is coming from the applanation-like view from the MS-39, so-called anamorphic display. So here you can spot pretty well the layer of the flap, and also you can see the peripheral remodeling of the epithelium on top of the previous flap. So we could measure everything. So since the deeper part of the flap was 148 microns, we added some extra standard deviations for the Visumax laser on top of that. Since the standard deviation of the Visumax laser is 4 microns, we decided to go a little bit deeper, so deeper than 160 microns. So at the end we did a flap 165 microns deep with the same laser, which is the Visumax. So we did our new flap, which is deeper and larger in order to encompass the previous one. And before lifting this new deeper flap, we wanted to be double sure not to intersect the previous interface. So intraoperatively, we took the patient to the MS-39 and we took the scan. And thanks to the anamorphic display, the applanation-like display, we could double check that the new plane, as you can see, is below, well below the previous plane. So we didn't intersect the previous interface and we were confident to go ahead with the new flap. So we went back to the operating room, so we could spot the edge of the new flap, and with some delicate maneuvers we could dissect the new plane. Of course, it's more tricky because the interface has somehow the laser shadow of the previous treatment and is also deeper, so the energy was probably a little bit low. So that's why we decided to go ahead with the Reinstein dissector spatula intended for smile, which is great for these uses because we just separate the tissue delicately. And at the end, we could enter with the LASIK instrument to dissect all the tissue. Maybe a second instrument was needed here to keep the eyeball stable, but we could easily lift the new deeper and larger flap, and we could go ahead with our enhancements, and now the patient is doing great. And I believe that the message is to consider the use of the intraoperative OCT whenever needed. Thank you for your attention.